So today's feature presentation is Standing on Business, and we have some really great speakers. We have Vika Stubblebean from Not Your Daddy's Films. We have Barbara from SCL Equipment Financing. And we have Rich Gunn from TCP Insurance. And all of the spokes on this wheel of business help us to make films, do what we want to do as business people, whether that's in the creative industry or otherwise. I think you're going to take away a lot of really interesting key points from today's discussion. And we'll take a little question and answer panel at the end. How's that sound for everybody? All right, let's go. So, one of the things that myself have encountered in the process of going from being an on-set film worker to starting a business, the business that all of us are now sitting in here, where we make anamorphic lenses to change the world of cinematography, is, thinking back, no matter what we're doing, we all need role models. And, sometimes we have role models that have good attributes, sometimes we have role models that have bad attributes. And I think that if we can see something of ourselves in these role models, that's exceedingly valuable. And I think that's why it's important to find people that inspire you. Maybe they're like you, maybe they're different from you, maybe they're flawed. But I think it's really important to think about the role models that inspire you to do the best work or be the best person, and we can borrow things from them. And if there's things that they've done that we don't like, we don't have to take those things. And so when I look at this, after I've made this deck, I kind of laugh because I guess I took on a couple of the characteristics of these role models in my physical attributions. Hair, losing eyeglasses, I don't know. But that being said, I think all of you are here because you have the opportunity to pioneer and change the world to be better, as we said, and bring meanings. So meaning is what we have as human beings in the face of a world where new technologies are encroaching and approaching. We can utilize those tools, we can choose to ignore those tools, or we can embrace those tools and empower ourselves. And I would just encourage everyone here to learn as much as they can and get as much knowledge as they can, because knowledge is power. And don't be afraid. I think none of you are afraid because you're all pioneers. So that pioneering spirit is something that even as a young boy inspired me, thinking about prospectors out there in the Old West in a wagon. And what's funny about that is that, one of the ways I was exposed to the idea of these prospectors traveling across America from the East Coast here to the West Coast was a little game on an Apple II computer that I have here in the museum called Oregon Trail. Anybody ever play Oregon Trail back on the Apple II? Or even, I think they might have ported that to the iPhone now, I'm not sure. But it's funny because, you're on this, in the 1980s, piece of technology that's supposed to be super futuristic. And what I was learning about is, how do we survive and not get dysentery? And so, I just want to very briefly talk about a couple of my inspiring role models and people that have inspired me to become an entrepreneur. And this is a very obvious one, very easy. The two Steves who started Apple Computers, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And they're very different people. So I think it's, important to realize that these two people have diametrically opposed views about certain things, but where their views overlap is where they were really able to take things to the next level, grow. And those early pioneering days of Apple Computer are what inspired me to become a business person. Whole stop. Because these guys started in a garage. They were irreverent. They were taking the whistle that you could get from a Captain Crunch cereal box and making prank phone calls and stealing phone service from AT&T by hacking the phone system. I want to encourage all of you to hack the system. Don't be afraid to stand up and change the world, even if you're going against authority. So, the key points that I wanted to touch on with these two and things that they share are an inventive spirit and playful imagination. So I think all of us here like being playful. We have a good imagination. We are creative. And that's one of the things we love about movies. And the other thing I love about these two guys is, besides the fact that they started in the garage and they were hugely irreverent and always pranking each other and pranking other people, is that they were making technology for people, not just technology for technology's sake. But these were some of the very first people to take stuff that was reserved for people at the highest echelon up in high castles when computers were the size of this whole building and keeping it from the average person. And we're at a forefront of new technology now. And in cinema, Atlas is at the forefront of bringing anamorphic technology to people that might not have otherwise had access to making anamorphic films. So these guys were massively inspiring to me. And next we'll jump into something a little more practical. Those guys were easy. That's sort of like the one you check off because it's obvious. These guys are, well-known entrepreneurs. Many of us are carrying around Apple products. I'm presenting from an Apple product. I got my pink iPhone right here. But another person you may not have heard about, because I want to bring value to everybody today and introduce you to new ideas, is a gentleman named Alberto Savoia. So this guy is really fun and really cool because the things that he taught me are to be practical. And if we think about the Oregon Trail and pioneering again and traveling across the country, we have to think about hardship. We have to remember we all are going to encounter many challenging things in our lifetimes, many hardships if we want to succeed. And as business people or people on the road to becoming business people, you will encounter hardship, and I believe you have the tenacity and the spirit to overcome those challenges if you believe in yourself and you fight. You need that fighting spirit. So the first thing that he says is most new ideas will fail. Absolute fact. We all have a lot of great ideas, and even with some of the very best ideas, we have to be okay with the idea that we may encounter failure. Failure doesn't have to stop us from proceeding. It doesn't have to prevent us from achieving our dreams, but we have to acknowledge that not every idea that we have is going to be a great one, and that it can be refined over time and that things can improve. And what we take away from those failures will ultimately make us the people that survive that Oregon Trail. The second thing he says is data beats opinion. Because again, we all have opinions, right? And opinions, sometimes they're true, sometimes they're not true. And those opinions can change. And I think being okay with change is something we have to be ready for as entrepreneurs and people on the road to starting our own business, or even just people working in other people's business. And what he means by that is don't just presuppose and go so far down the road that you're traveling across the country like in that Oregon Trail game and you haven't packed enough, beef jerky. So after you've played Oregon Trail a few times, you have to accumulate some of your beef jerky on the road, and that's data. So just start accumulating that data, thinking about that data, and processing it, and also come to terms that sometimes you might start with one opinion, and you might, by the end of the journey, discover you have a different or modified opinion, and that's okay. And looking at the first thing, failure, knowing you're going to fail, we just have to look right in the mirror and say, hey, you know what? I might fail today. I'm going to be okay with that, but do it fast and do it cheap because it's the part that sucks, right? It sucks to fail. We don't like to fail, but the more that we can realize we may fail and we have the chance to learn from that failure, and that's where data comes from, we can actually grow, go back, and try again. Just like the old song, dust yourself off, pick yourself up, and start all over again. Love that song. It's a hugely inspiring old song for me. So that's Alberto Savoia. And to put this in practical terms, in terms of product making, something I'd love to share with you that's one of my own kind of takeaways after transitioning from being someone in the film industry, primarily working on set, first as a set lighting technician, becoming a digital imaging technician, becoming a cinematographer, and then starting two businesses, is you have to prototype your ideas. And prototype is a word that Alberto Savoia came up with that just means how do you quickly test an idea without spending too much money or too much time? So the sooner you test something and find out whether it's going to succeed or fail at the early stages, the more data you can get. So it's really just a probability game if we think about it. The more you fail, the more you can learn. So the faster we fail, the faster we can learn, the bigger the lake of data that we can get, right? Am I right? It's true. So on a film set, what I'd like to say, the big thing I've learned is we start with a blueprint in film. That's the script. And that script is beautiful because it lays out a perfect scenario. That blueprint marks out start to finish exactly what the writer and the team think is going to happen. And the reality is, once we get onto that Oregon Trail, there may be wild wolves, there may be grizzly bears, vultures, all kinds of problems along the road, right? And, they didn't account for that when they wrote the script. So how do we take that perfect blueprint for the movie and then adjust to the realities that we face in the real world? And how do we do it quickly? Because we're always in a rush. And it's the same with product making. We might design something, we might go through all the challenges of perfect design, and then you get to the real world where you have to manufacture the item. You go, oh, yeah, I forgot there might be some deflection in the machine when the thing is running, and then it turns out deformed. So we designed it in a perfect environment, and the reality is the real world is so far from perfect, and the sooner we know that, the sooner we can kind of pre-account for it. And that's what filmmaking taught me, and that's how I learned to become a product manager and a CEO for the company that we're now sitting in. Knowing you want to start out with a good blueprint, knowing that you're going to encounter challenges and being adaptive and ready to change as the conditions change and learn from it and move on. And finally, I'm going to share with you some of the knowledge of Tom Chi, who's a huge inspiration and role model for me. This guy is known for one of the biggest failures in the tech industry. Can anyone guess what that might be? I'll give you a hint. Quibi, nice, I like that. Google Glass. So poor Tom Chi was the product manager at Google who was tasked with making the Google Glass, which many people call one of the biggest failures of Silicon Valley. And he has some really great insights that overlap well with Alberto Savoya's idea of prototyping, which is, building a prototype and refining it. He says that doing is the best kind of thinking. And I wholeheartedly agree with him. So it's great to presuppose and imagine and envision things, but the more you can practice something, the quicker you can learn and build that lake of data as you go. So throughout those failures, throughout those accidents, those mistakes, sometimes there's happy accidents that we all have too. But getting on the road rather than debating things and starting and learning from the process is exceedingly valuable. The second thing that Tom taught me that I really agree with is cultivating a culture of learning rather than knowing. So one of the things we have to acknowledge as human beings is that it's challenging to do two things at the same time, right? I mean, some of us can walk and chew gum, some of us can send text messages and ride a bicycle, and some of us do better when we are multitasking. I might be one of those people, I'm not sure. I might have attention deficit disorder. I have to analyze that. I feel like I'm not sure if I've always had it or if I've developed it as an adult, but that's okay. But my point here is that you want to cultivate a culture of learning rather than a culture of knowing, because it's very hard to do two things or hold two ideas at the same time. If you already know something, it's going to be really hard to learn something, because that learning is going to challenge what you already know. And reality is a lot more malleable, especially these days, than we think it is. So we have the power, all of you have the power to change reality. You are here, you're pioneers, you can change the world. I'm so excited to see all of you change the world for a better place, whether that's through making new products, telling new stories, making great movies with anamorphic lenses, singing songs, writing books. Let's go. You guys got this. That's his third point. Try to make a net positive impact. So knowing that things are going to sometimes suck, knowing that you're going to meet a lot of challenges on that Oregon Trail, but reminding your team, if it's a culture that you're building in a company, that the number one thing is learning, because you can go away actually from a great success having not learned anything. So we could always do the same thing over and over, knowing exactly the process, but you're going to grow a lot less if you're always doing the same exact thing. And so sometimes a little bit of failure might teach you some really valuable insights along the way that make the next thing that you do, whether it's your own business or whether it's the business that you're currently in, better. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Alberto Savoia. Thank you, two Steves. And thank all of you for coming today and, sharing your knowledge with us. Vika, Barbara, Rich, really excited to see your presentations. And I'm really excited to see what all of you do, knowing that knowledge is power and you have the power to change the world through business and make the world better and make a better life for yourself, your families, and your friends. So thank you for coming to Atlas Wednesday. This has been my feature presentation.